And comments indeed. Well, it's time for our paper review this morning. Joining us this morning is Patrick Timms. He's editor of Wolves of Westminster. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, sir.
I hear you had trouble getting in.
Yes, the car was quite late, I'm afraid. So
no, don't worry.
So I haven't had that much time to prep. But I mean, I was... Well, you know, there's a very useful Twitter account, isn't there? The Tomorrow's Papers Today thing. So I was looking at that last night. So
very good. So you're fully prepped. Wow. So Wolves of Westminster, for people who don't know, do you want to tell us what that is?
Yes. So thank you. So we're a platform. We do news, opinion, analysis. We do quite a lot of comment stuff, but we also have quite a lot of exclusives, and we've done quite a bit of stuff on examining what's going on the sort of the more radical lefty end of the spectrum.
Right.
So there's a few stories that you'll have seen also that have appeared in the Express and the Sun and places like that actually originally came from us. So that's the kind of thing that we do. But we are definitely open.
Trailblazing.
Well, trying to, yes. But we also, what we like to do really, there's a lot of people who've worked for us on a voluntary basis who've actually ended up working for places like the Express and the Sun. And what we do, we're kind of a gatekeeper into that. So we give people a portfolio that they can use for moving into journalism later on.
Yeah, that's fantastic, actually. And you nurture them.
That's a really good word. I like that word. Yes, nurture them.
You incubate them.
Well, okay.
Yeah, okay, fine. No, it's really good to know what you do. Okay, so lots and lots of stories this morning. I mean, obviously, for me, and I've been told off already once today for going on about it, but it is extraordinary. Look, as you know, I was in the European Parliament as an MEP.
Sure.
We fought very hard. I held my nose when we voted for the deal, but we were assured that this would be sorted. It hasn't been sorted. How many years are we down the line?
Yeah.
And Boris Johnson back, isn't he? He's very much stirring the pot. He's saying the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is really important. So the front page of the Telegraph this morning saying Sunak snubs Johnson over new Brexit deal. The Times takes a slightly different view.
No, what a surprise.
Well, there's a surprise indeed. I'm the Prime Minister who will get Brexit done.
Yeah.
Will he?
Well, that's what he's saying. Now, I'll tell you what, interestingly, though, I think what is very interesting to do is look at what's being said on the ground locally. And we've really got to pay attention to what's happening in Northern Ireland here at the moment. Now, interestingly, I was actually speaking to somebody just last night. We put some coverage out on Wolves. Somebody who is now, he's a senior member of the executive committee of the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland.
Right.
And the quote that we put out was, what he was saying was, look, if they do this such that EU law ends up still, having precedence in Northern Ireland, then Rishi Sunak will have given Ursula von der Leyen a greater say over us who live here than the King, and that's a disgrace. So that's the quote that we put out, and I think that's a definite sentiment that's going on right now.
But it's interesting, and I understand that people voted Remain. Obviously, 48% voted Remain, and they feel, as that comment just said, David, stop it, get over it. Northern Ireland isn't our problem, sort of thing. But it is our problem because we are a united kingdom. The clue is in the title, and I feel very sorry for businesses who are trying to trade with Northern Ireland. Equally, those people in Northern Ireland who are trying to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom, with all the barriers. We've got this ridiculous sort of customs border in the middle of the Irish Sea. Yeah. Also, they're now talking about red and green lanes, but for me, the ultimate arbiter being the ECJ is an absolutely non-starter.
Well, that seems to be the price, doesn't it? When we look at what, we don't have a great deal of material from the government at the moment because we're in what's now, I think, known as the tunnel, isn't it? Where there's not a great deal of information that's coming out. But it looks as though that's set to be the price. Now, but with that said, I think we'll be very careful here because it could be that it is the final arbiter in name only.
Come on, not this again.
No, I'm just saying, that it's possible...
What, to appease the EU?
Yes, that I'm saying that might be the Prime Minister's strategy. I'm not saying I agree with it. What I am saying is that might be what he's trying to go for.
So what I understood was that the Supreme Court would have ultimate say, but above that, in name, would therefore be the ECJ.
Yes, and like I say, you have when it gets to this point with these kinds of negotiations, what you have to be thinking about is, what is it ultimately that is being aimed at here? And what we don't know, and this is what I think is important for viewers, and especially Brexiteer viewers to consider, is we don't know what the Prime Minister's aim is. We don't know what his aim is, so it's worth seeing. And of course, he won't even show the text to the DUP. He won't even show the text to his own party.
No, look, you're a political genius. Do you not think it would have been a good idea to have the DUP and the ERG on side, or at least, we were talking about, to have the Northern Ireland Minister possibly involved?
Yes, I do. And I've got now Steve Baker, I think, was frozen out of it, wasn't he? didn't he?
Yes.
Well, that's what. No, he was the Telegraph. Somebody that was reporting. Yes, absolutely. And look, I'm not saying it looks good. It doesn't look good.
It doesn't.
It looks like a fudge. But then again, often things do end up looking like a fudge that don't necessarily turn out to be. If you look at what Boris Johnson did with his deal and dealing with the withdrawal agreement, it looked like a fudge all the way up until the last couple of weeks. So let's...
Well, it kind of was a fudge.
It was a fudge.
I know.
I mean, what worries me about this, and this in name only, is that we know that lawyers won't care about name only.
Absolutely.
And the moment that our Supreme Court makes a ruling that they don't like, they will use that law that sits there to go to the European Court, and then it won't be in name only. I just think it has to go. I don't think it can sit there.
No, and also I was just looking back at the DUP and their 7 things that they have to fulfil. This doesn't, as far as we know, and you're right, we don't know the detail, but I think we'll know tomorrow morning.
I expect so.
There's also a 3-line whip apparently being imposed for tomorrow morning.
That.
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
I heard that yesterday. Now, I think the government's view was they were going to try and force a vote tomorrow. That's how they were trying to do it. They know they don't have the support, and obviously then they choreographed Ursula von der Leyen to come over and have a handshake. Then they tried to involve the King. Well, the King's politely declined and told them where to put that. And now Ursula von der Leyen has also been cancelled.
Well, exactly.
That's an expression I never thought I'd say.
Well, she sort of has. But, I mean, look, let's be clear. I mean, like I say, it does have all the makings of looking like a fudge. My approach to these things in politics is always to try and assume until the last moment that maybe people are trying to be decent, but I think I share your view that ultimately this is not really what people wanted. And I think actually just looking at the comments that you've had coming in already, it looks as though... But even so, we then have to look at the Northern Ireland Protocol. The situation on the ground in Northern Ireland.
Of course we do. And we've seen what happened with the real IRA.
Exactly. And this is the quote I was giving to you, is actually people are not happy with this. And I think there's a real risk that it's going to be seen in Northern Ireland as though the Prime Minister actually... and the government in general of the UK is not very interested in what happens over there, that he sees it as something to get off his desk. Do you see what I mean?
I think he sees it as more than that. I think he sees it as a political opportunity, to create a legacy and be a hero. I think this man has an ego far, far taller than him. I really do.
Well, I've met him, and you're right. He's not. Anyway, it's not really further with that one. But I think actually it's a very good point to make about the legacy. In that, of course, he's looking at his, I want to say his predecessor, technically is his predecessor but one, and that really he wants to be able to say, look, I fixed Boris Johnson's mess. Do you think that's right?
Yes, and I think he also wants to undo the protocol bill because that was Boris as well.
Yes, yeah.
I agree. Lots and lots of messages coming in. Phil Soskin says, any deal in Northern Ireland done by Rishi and Hunt will be a Remain deal. It will not actually be a Brexit deal. Also, this is quite nice. This is from Samantha Jane Owen Kendall saying, thank you for brightening my day before I head off to play airsoft. I'm watching how outraged you are with the Northern Ireland Protocol. Come and join me. I'm a 56-year-old nanny and release your rage and aggression. It's amazing to get that feel-good factor back. So tensions are really running very high in the country.
Absolutely.
And rightly so, actually.
Yes, and of course it's a Sunday morning. And we've got people not happy. We've got people not happy because we're expecting this announcement. Then again, we were expecting this announcement last week.
We were. So what do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
I think tomorrow something is going to happen. I'm going to leave it there. Something is going to happen. Yeah. I don't think we're necessarily going to get the deal announcement tomorrow. I think we're going to get an announcement about an announcement. Do you see what I mean?
I agree.
And it'll be later this week.
OK. Let's move on. What else do you have? I think you've got the Express in front of you there.
I have, yes. So now they are, so we have this business of the amount of money that it costs for legal aid.
Oh, yeah, indeed.
For immigrants who come in on small boats. And, of course, what the Express is talking about is the lawyers' fees, basically, for people defending them.
Well, they've called it a gravy train. I mean, we know. We were talking about there are 7,000 in the backlog. We know the cost is £7 million a day, 2.5 billion a year. And, of course, all of these claims coming backwards and forwards, being played ping-pong by these lawyers. Yeah. It is a gravy train.
It is, and we are one of the most generous countries in Europe in terms of migrants. So maybe if we weren't quite so generous, people would not risk their lives to get here in the Channel.
And of course, Australia took a different approach, and suddenly that all stopped, didn't it? But I'll tell you what I think about this is there's plenty of industries that I've seen that sort of turn up in so they sort of come along and invent themselves and then demand recognition as though there was some sort of fundamental constant of the universe, as though it always existed, as though the principles upon which they operate were actually quite fundamental, which in fact they're not. And I think what the Express is getting at here is that this thing has turned up, it's costing us money, it's costing taxpayers money, and the reality is, what is it being done for?
40 million last year.
But what is it being done for this country?
Nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And at a time when people can't afford to eat or put their heating on, this is wrong.
And, there's a story today that the first choice acceptances into secondary schools is the lowest it's ever been.
I saw that as well.
So this is parents not able to get school places where they want for their children. All of these families will bring their families over, will have children. That's more school places going, it's more doctors' places going, it's more maternity wards being over. There are hidden costs here that people know about but are not widely spoken about. The cost of the country is not just that initial migrant arriving and going in a hotel.
No, I agree completely.
Let's move on now to, shall we, the Sunday People. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this.
Okay.
The headline this morning is "Shameless. I'm a celebrity. Get me my own TV company."
I'm leaving.
What's this about?
I know who you're talking about.
Is this Matt Hancock? Or is it?
This is Matt Hancock. So apparently there is fury as disgraced Hancock sets up a telly firm. Matt Hancock set up his own TV company to launch a lucrative broadcasting career when he quits politics. Now, of course, he was Tory Health Secretary, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was forced to resign, of course, being caught in that clinch, by the way, captured on cameras made by, I think, China.
Which shouldn't have been there.
Which shouldn't have been there, exactly right, which obviously compromised national security, but that's a whole other ball game. He was paid £320,000 to appear on I'm Celebrity last year. Now he set up a limited company called Green Hazel, which lists its business as television programming. It was branded disgraceful by Labour MP Richard Bergen, who has campaigning for a ban to bill to ban MPs from having second jobs. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I'm going to be quite careful about what I say here, but from what I hear, I think basically Matt Hancock, obviously, yes, let's try and be fair. He was the health secretary who guided us through most of the pandemic. He then broke his own rules. There's then been a huge fury about that. Now, I think what Matt has tried to do is try to get back in with the party, and therefore also the government hierarchy, and they've just not let him, which I think politically is astute, is perfectly sensible. Then he went on the telly, didn't he? Now he's doing this. I think he's basically got to the point where he doesn't really care anymore.
No.
And so you end up with stuff like this, which of course anyone with any political astuteness would say is actually not a very good move. But he's doing it anyway, so I think there's a reason.
But you
for
see,
that.
It's extraordinary because his constituency, I think, is mid-Suffolk, which you don't count the vote, you weigh it. I mean, you get it. It's a Conservative seat. So Matt Hancock could have stayed, but I'm not sure that actually there's public support in Suffolk
if
for
they
Matt
selected
Hancock.
him again, which they may not have
Well,
done.
they may not,
Yes.
and that I think is the key to this. He probably could see the writing on the wall.
Yes, precisely.
I voted for Matt as my plank the last time I was on Plank of the Week again because this is another example of a massive ego in politics, desperate to be famous. This man is desperate to carve out a TV career, to be famous. And it's all about his ego. It always has been, and it is again. And he's acting like a spoilt child because he feels like he was snubbed by the party.
And while I agree with you mostly, can I say to both of you as doctors, given that obviously you also deal with mental health, do you think there's maybe an element here where he's given up, he doesn't care, and so he's almost self-harming here?
No, I don't.
Do you not?
No,
I don't.
He's absolutely
But it's a good proposition.
Yeah.
I think actually, and we've spoken a great deal about this, that I think Matt Hancock lacks sometimes the sensitivity to understand, to read
empathy.
a room. I think he doesn't really understand the broader picture. He sees things very much in black and white. And also, you mentioned guiding us through COVID. Look at the mess on PPE procurement, on giving contracts to people like that.
With you, yeah.
shipping people into care homes.
Shipping people into care homes when they should never have been sent there without being tested. I mean,
I think actually on the world stage, when you look at because the various various countries made their various failures because we hadn't had to deal with this in 100 years.
Indeed.
But that, I think, really was the headline for us, was the care homes and people being sent.
And people dying as a result.
People died.
Alone.
I was about to say that, and they were denied access to their relatives, and that, for me, is unforgivable.
I agree.
Sorry. Can I have a story?
Go on.
Yes, you can have a story.
Do you mind?
Yeah, no.
So in the Express again...
it's a nice one.
It is. It's back to the Express. So a staggering statistic. 12 pupils a day are being suspended from our schools for transphobic or homophobic bullying. Now, this is really interesting because obviously...
12 a day?
12 a day. So 912 pupils... Sorry, 1,668 pupils last year suspended for anti-trans, anti-gay abuse. Now, listen, I don't agree with bullying. I was bullied terribly at school all the way through. So I don't agree with bullying. What concerns me here is who's deciding what is transphobic and homophobic bullying. We had a boy last week who touched a girl's leg in class and was accused of being a rapist. Who's setting the rules? We are traumatising our children now. I think our children are now too scared to breathe on most days.
You see, also, it's a very fine line, this, isn't it? I'd welcome your view on this. At school, banter is part of growing up, and also hurling at insults at each other is part of growing. Testing of boundaries, all that. For me, this is about intent, because if you are truly homophobic or transphobic, it will be said with vitriol and bile, and that is very different to someone calling you something as you know, a name just to rile you.
Well, they gave examples yesterday of stop being a girl.
That's not homophobic. That's not sexist.
Sexist. Stop being a girl.
Well, you see, you and I have talked about this, and I don't know whether I can say this, but you know, you said, why do you highlight all your notes? And I said, because I'm you're girly swat.
And I call you a girl.
Yes, I'm going to call you out. You have to leave now.
I'm going to attempt to fit myself into this conversation.
What do you think?
Okay, my first little very minor observation is I do think sometimes people can actually do it very subtly, where it's not necessarily all that vitriolic.
Okay.
But. So having worked in the education sector for 10 years, what I would say is obviously there's been a lot of change that we've seen in that sector, where we've seen the move towards academy trust and that sort of thing. And the only reason I mention all of that is because the school, basically, what it is, you're saying who decides? Who decides? Okay, the school will have a behaviour policy, right? That's set by the school. However, if it's part of a trust, part or all of it may also be set by the trust. Now, this replaces the way that things used to be done, where it was done by the local authority never really set behaviour policies. So, to answer the question literally, who decides? Basically, the school does, but there may be influences that come down upon them from what trust they're in, or if they're still a community school, from the local authority. This can happen. So to answer the question literally, that's the case. But you are right that ultimately, in terms of suspensions, it will be somebody like the head teacher or the deputy head teacher or one of the assistant heads who will actually decide upon that. And then I think the point that's being highlighted here is, does this come down to some degree of personal discretion, which, as you say, could also be political? And I think that's quite right. Yes, so certainly, in my experience, that is certainly possible. Not definite, but possible.
Can I just move on to one final story? This is in the Telegraph. More than half believe the UK's net zero target can't be achieved by 2050. Of course, the government has said this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that we are net zero by 2050. By the way, of course, we have to, because we've signed up to it under the ridiculous agreement with the EU, so we can't even come out of it. This survey found that half of the public, 54%, believe net zero is unachievable. Only 14% say we can achieve it. 32% are undecided. This is according to quite a big survey. And of course, it does seem to me the government is pushing one way, and the public are feeling quite sort of a different sentiment.
I think you're probably quite right. I always add the caveat here that, especially when it's something to do with a poll or a survey, you have to just think about whether in this, so something like this, whether they mean unachievable. When they say unachievable, what they actually mean is undesirable. You know, so you've always got to bear that in mind. And the other thing I always say to people is that the opinion polls of this nature are answered by the kinds of people who A, are offered opinion polls in the first place, and B, actually decide to respond to them. So it's not necessarily representative.
So they're self-selecting in some ways.
But in some, I do think you're right. Actually, I think this seems, you know, from those figures, that seems to be a very valid opinion poll. I think most of the public actually doesn't. But you see, that's why I wanted to get onto that angle. I think it's less that people think it's it can't be done, but more that they think that it shouldn't be done.
I agree with you, and I think if people thought it was easy enough to do and wouldn't cost them an arm and a leg, they'd be more than happy to do it, because why wouldn't they?
Can I just also, this poll goes on to talk about lots of things, and it just makes me wonder about the dichotomy between government and what the public are thinking, because they talk about euthanasia. 2/3 of the public believe it should be legalised. They talk about abortion. 3/4 of the public oppose a ban on abortion. They also talk about cannabis. The majority in favour of legalising cannabis, 43% in favour versus 29% against. Really interesting, because that accords with what I hear on the ground, but I don't hear that from government.
No, well, you wouldn't. I mean, just to be clear, and of course, hey, if you ask the government, they're going to say, well, I mean, this is an opinion poll that somebody's done. You know, with this is not something we feel they need to comment on. If they commented on every opinion poll, certainly if they commented on the kind of polls they don't want to think about, like we're going to lose the next election.
We're not hearing it in their policy, are we?
No, I mean, I can't remember the last time any government went into election saying let's have a policy on whether or not we should legalise cannabis. Can you?
No,
I don't think that's
Lib
really
Dems.
Oh, good. Well, all right.
Good.
Went into government. All right.
Okay, went into an election. Lib Dems do. They want to make not legalise, decriminalise.
Decriminalise, and there's a big difference between decriminalising and legalising.
Absolutely.
I mean, these are really interesting subjects, actually, and it's interesting. Just finally, if I may just ask you, in terms of the current Conservative Party, the government, is time almost up?
I think there's probably a sense within the party that it is. I think there is an element, now I do happen to be aware that there is an element within the party that wants to bring Boris back, and this has been talked about, and that is ongoing. But I think actually, if we're going to conclude now, what I would draw that back to is almost where we began, where you were saying, look, you know, this is what Rishi's doing with the Brexit deal. Legacy. I would use the word legacy, and it does seem to me as though the party is now thinking we're going to have to leave office with the best set of arrangements for the country that we can, whether or not they're right about that, but that does seem to be the sense to me within the party.
I just wonder whether actually there is no legacy, that it's so fractured now, that the members are so angry. They were given a vote, it's been ignored, and of course again you're seeing fracturing between the people in government and those people who actually form the membership. That to me is untenable.
It is untenable. Then again, you have the same thing within Labour. I mean, if you look at actually what's been going on in that party, you know, Starmer has kicked out about 90,000 people. He's not followed the Kinnock strategy, which was of containment. So in the Labour Party, you have policy is set at conference, on the floor of conference. Now, what Kinnock used to do is he got rid of a few of the more egregious ones, but then he kept the rest of them in because that kept their subs, and it meant that that you could basically contain them. They did have glorious defeat, which they like quite a lot, by the way, that lot, the far left. But what Starmer's now done is he's kicked out a lot of them. Now I happen to be aware that there is now a movement forming which has a purpose of creating a new mass party of Labour, as they call it. And you're talking about 90,000, you're talking about plus working with the don't pay people, the enough is enough people. And actually that could be a very major vote split in the next election.
It could indeed. Patrick, thank you so much for coming in. Really good to see you. That's Patrick Timms, who is editor of Wolves of Westminster. After the break, it's time for your calls, your thoughts and your opinions. This is TalkTV, broadcasting live from central London.